Hi, I'm Laura Maes. I'm based in Belgium, and I'm going to give a few examples of my work. You will see that they are very diverse, very different from one another, but the common thing is that they all start from sound, and they always have a material aspect to it, and most of the time this material aspect is directly related to the sound producing elements. First work I'm going to talk about is oorwonde. It's Dutch, and in English it translates into ear wound. It's an audio operating table. It's an interactive work. It was made for one person who has to go and lie down on the table. And the main idea behind the work was to explore bodily hearing, so hearing through the body. So the sounds I used, movement is as important as the audio result. At the end of the table, there is a very bright lamp, which resembles an operating lamp. And when you go and lie down on the table, you really have to close your eyes, just because the light is too strong. This was done on purpose to have a better listening experience. There are various elements that are integrated into the table. I use speakers as well as electromagnets, contact microphones, and one vibrator motor. The whole thing is interactive. I use 4 sensitive resistors. 2 of those were placed in the neck. This is the neck element. And you have 6 sensors, 3 on each hand element. So the person that lies on the table can control all the elements through the sensors. So I use electromagnets. This is the element for the buttocks, and I made use of a vibrator motor for that. The knee elements, I used various types of speakers, and they were placed on something that could be transportable, so that it could be adapted to persons of various length. And these are the elements for the feet. This is an element for the mouth, so it's a piezoelectric disc that's cast into resin, and I put some latex over it for each different user. And the person who lies on the table has to put his teeth onto the element to hear through bone conduction. So you can only hear the sound when you actually put your teeth onto it. I'll just show you an example. So the sound only starts when you go and lie down on the table and you activate the sensors. And then depending on the type of pressure that you give, the sound changes. When you stand next to the table, you don't actually hear a lot. It's only when you're on the table that you can actually experience the sounds. Another work I'll talk about is called Maes, it's Ice Palace. There are 2 sculptures. I used copper tubes that were filled with freon gas. It's basically like an open refrigerator. It's not my most ecological work, but I used solar panels after that to compensate. So the idea is that you hang these copper tubes in a space, and after a while, it starts to form ice crystals onto the tubes. The ice crystals get thicker and thicker. And in the end, after a few days or a week, it depends on the humidity and temperature of the room, they start to drip. I also added artificial water drippers to it to enhance the process. And the first sculpture that I made was actually part of a performance called 492 Kilos. It was an alternative piano recital curated by Frederik Kroene and performed by Frederik Kroene. And there were several pieces by Cathy van Eck, Marianne Tipap Alexandri, Stefan Prins, Simon Steen Andersen, and so on, and me as well. So you have the ice sculpture that's hanging above the piano, There's an alternative lid made in plexiglass above the piano because, of course, you don't want to have water drops falling into the piano. But the water drops fall on very thin glass plates. They're between 1 and 3 millimeter thickness. And the plates are attached to stainless steel staves. So the sound of the water drop goes onto the glass plate and then into the stainless steel stave. And at the end of the stainless steel stave is a contact microphone. There's also a small motor that you will hear in the audio example that goes round and with a small wire hits the stave. The pianist could determine the speed of the water drops with force-sensitive resistors that were placed on the keyboard of the piano, as well as the speed of the motor. Yeah, so here you can see the glass plates. So it was presented, I made a composition for that, but it's also presented as an installation. The harsh sound that you hear is a motor, the turning motor. I made a second version of the work, and this time the water drops were falling onto very thin metal sheets. And again, the sound was made audible by placing contact microphones at the end of the sheets. Stereotaxy is a work made for one person as well. And first, the person has to be prepared. He has to be put electrodes on the head. Next, he takes place into a capsule. And the capsule is slowly, very slowly brought horizontal. In the capsule, there are various types of speakers integrated. And the idea is to translate the brain activity into real time, into sound, spatialized all over. And we recorded, this installation was made together with Christoph Lauwers, and we got data from the University of Ghent, the neuroscience department. So we had the actual brain waves recorded, and as in Jacob's case, before they are inaudible, you can't hear them, so we had to transpose them as well to make them audible for us, for people. So we used those original recordings of brainwaves, and then the signal of the electrodes determined the type of effects that were used on the sound. So you would get a different result if you were anxious, or if you were feeling very at ease, if you would blink your eyes, things like that. Okay, another work I've done, actually 3 versions of this exist, is 3x4. It's a work that is based on a physical location, but can also be seen in real time on the internet. The first version was made for a festival in Kortrijk, and I could use a former barbershop, or the shop window of a former barbershop. So I based the work on the barber pole You have those white, red, and blue lines that seem to turn endlessly. And there's a webcam that films a public space, and the image of the webcam is divided into 12 parts, therefore the name 3 times 4. And to each of those parts, a sound and image is associated. So for example, if you get movements in one specific part of the image, that sound and image will be evoked. So in this case, I used as an image the barber pole. So if there would be activity in all 12, on the whole field of the webcam, in all 12 surfaces, you would get a complete barber pole. And to each section, I had a barber sound, cutting and so on. And there was one general layer, a shepherd tone, that's a collection of sine waves that seems to rise endlessly. That's the acoustic equivalent of the concept of the barber pole that also seems to rise endlessly. The second version was made for a pub in Copenhagen, or the inner courts of the pub. And here I used the image of a glass for each sound, as well as, for each surface of the webcam, as well as the sounds of rubbed and bowed or tapped glass. And the layer underneath were pub sounds that I recorded, but without music. So actually the visitor was invited to create his own pub music. Oh. So the image you can see now was streamed in real time on the internet as well. The final version of the work was made for the Light Festival in Ghent. And the location that I could use used to be an orphanage called the Blue Boys. Afterwards, the building was demolished and a new building was set up that was a national bank. But at the time of the festival, the National Bank was no longer in the building and it was used by the conservatory. So I choose as an image an old money billiard, I don't know the English word, from Belgium. And it depicted the composer Gritti. But instead of the composer, I used the image of a praying young child. And the underlying sounds were falling coins. And to each of the surfaces, you got a part of a hymn that was sung by a young boy. The last work I will talk about is Lichtlicht. It's a permanent installation, the only permanent installation I've done up till now. It's placed in the Klankenbos. It's a forest with several sound installations in the east of Belgium. It's placed on a playground, and it's actually a bench, and people are invited, to work together to create sound. So there are various light-dependent resistors that are put underneath the glass. And depending on which light-dependent resistors are activated, different sounds turn up. So general sound is based on the environment, as there is a highway running near to the playground, so it's based on cars. And then I also use various types of sine waves. It's solar powered, so the black things that you can see underneath are solar panels. And the sound is transmitted through transducers that you can see over there that were placed on a stainless steel plate. The work I've made now is in the Thayer School of Engineering in the entrance hall. It also works with solar panels, but different from the previous work that I just showed, Lichtlicht. The solar panels are directly connected to circuits, 200 circuits, and the sounds depends directly on the amount of sunlight, so you get different results.
Hi, thank you. I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about an ear wound, the tension between the kind of soothing, relaxing sounds that are produced and maybe the cold metal and the anxiety-inducing affect of the operating table and the lights.
Yeah, thank you. Well, most people are slightly afraid to go and lie onto the table because of the way it looks. But once they've experienced it, they actually really like it because it's relaxing and they are in full control of what, the things they can hear by pressing the various sensors. And it was also my intention to get a big difference between either the way the work looks as well as how it sounds. But still, yeah, for example, if the feet element, it tickle a bit, so people get, oh, because it's not only sound, but they can feel it as well. So.
Wanted to ask a question that kind of ties into the last one. In the work where you're essentially listening to your brain waves, it seems like the response to the sound would become part of the brain waves because I've heard a sound, now my brain reacts to that sound. So is there kind of like a cerebral feedback going on? And would it change if the person wasn't hearing their own brain?
Well, actually, you don't really listen to your brain waves, but you listen to the recorded brain waves. The electrodes measure your brain activity, and that determines the effects that are used on the recorded sounds. But of course, there is some interaction. It's also, in this case as well as in Oorbonde, people are slightly afraid to go into the cabin because it's dark, it's small, and then they are put horizontal as well. So it takes some courage to go inside, but except if you have claustrophobia. Otherwise, it's a very relaxing experience because all the sounds coming from everywhere, and you can really feel at ease. There are no very harsh sounds or But of course, if you measure brain activity, you get most difference between being awake and being asleep. Then you can really see a difference in the recorded data. But otherwise, there is not that much difference. It's not like I can think about something and then the wave will change. It's not like that. It's more the state of where you're in, if you're anxious or not, that will determine the brain.
What kind of brain waves? What kind of brain? Alpha waves, beta waves? What kind of brain waves?
Beta waves.
What kind?
Yeah, beta waves. Yeah. So we work together with the neuroscience department of University of Ghent to get the recorded data.
Thank you very much, Laura.